Didn't you ever wonder where your mom and dad learned it all?
Learn what?
You're a wizard, Harry.
I shall be a generous god one day.
Happy holidays, folks! Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and just like our Lord and Savior, Santa Claus, who clearly uses some form of unnatural and obscene witchcraft to manipulate the very fabric of time and space in order to complete his frankly impossible house-to-house trip every single year,
he will be subjected to approximately 17,500 times the force of gravity.
I also enjoy using magic in games of Warhammer. What the fuck, my mini? And recently, I played a game using only wizards. Today, we're going to be talking about Thousand Suns. And while you might say,
But Trevi, Thousand Suns are an army that already takes lots of psychers. Doesn't that mean basically just a regular Thousand Suns army?
absolutely not. And by that, I mean, you're not wrong. But like most factions in the 41st millennium, Thousand Suns typically supplement themselves with a variety of advanced military hardware. This includes things like machine guns, infantry formations, battle tanks, armored personnel carriers, and nameless horrors beyond the ken of reality. But today, we're not taking any of that garbage. If it's not a psyker character,
I don't want it. I never have.
this means no transports, no big long-range guns, and importantly, no rubric marine squads to grant rerolls and leadership bonuses to our characters. It also means no access to cheap infantry for units that cost less than 30 points per wound.
I'm expensive, aren't I?
And I'm like, yes. Yes, you are really expensive.
Now, with that in mind, assembling my cabal of sorcerous madmen was fairly easy. We started with Magnus, who's the star of the Thousand Suns faction and the Big Daddy Wizard himself. He's fast, he's hard to kill, he makes people's heads explode by filling them with intrusive thoughts and also giant magic laser beams. He can also support the team with extra movement and bonuses to cast their own psychic nukes, which is relevant because the strength value of most of our army is mid at best. One of the big strategies available to a list like this, however, is surrounding Magnus with a psychic cabal of wizards in order to use his abilities to supercharge their attacks. Now, the downside of the Wizard Council is that our entire team is composed of arthritic octogenarians, so a stiff breeze will wipe out the entire army.
I'm having chest pain!
But with the indirect fire strat from the Thousand Suns Index, we can hopefully keep our carrier group of sorcerers safe while psychically obliterating everything within about an 18-inch aura around a protective ruin. Now, the indirect fire strat is pretty wacky, but super useful in a list like this. It requires a spotter to trigger, but then also grants the ability to shoot around solid objects, to literally all of the cool wizard powers, when targeting the unit that is spotted by the spotter. So to that end, I've also recruited a trio of Zangor shamans to the team, which are honestly fairly garbage.
Just the worst.
They're really bad at attacking, they have super bad defensive stats, and the bizarre ability to ride a surfboard significantly worse than the power-armored sorcerers, making them mounted rather than infantry, and so restricting their movement through walls. Also, they're slower, despite the Discs of Zinch being functionally identical.
None of this makes sense.
But they are still move 10, and that's a decent move characteristic, and they are the cheapest Kabbalistic sorcerers that we can afford. So they act as great spotters for the artillery wizards and a good way to throw magic spells out at random unexpected angles your opponent might not be aware of. Now, speaking of wizard stuff, for those who don't know, the Thousand Suns army rule is simply the ability to do janky magic shit. Each psyker in the army contributes to a pool of Cabal points that can be spent on a frankly dizzying array of magic utility spells. These can be anything from granting rerolls or free stratagems to breaking the very laws of time itself or immolating your opponent with fireballs.
Magic missile! Magic missile!
Or, most dangerously, messing with your opponent's balls.
Testicular torture!
So how many Cabal points do you get from this?
Who fucking knows, man?
All of them.
So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So that's 18, 21, 25. 28 if everybody's on the board. Now, most Thousand Sons units have attached psychers that generate these points. However, the more dedicated combat units like Rubric Marines and Scarab Occult Terminators typically generate fewer than the caster characters, who are more powerful, which is especially useful because that latter thing is entirely what the list is composed of. So to charge up the army with power, I've added a little ritual coven of Exalted Sorcerers and Ahriman, who will probably hang out for the entire game in my deployment zone and generate errant doom bolts every turn. In a vain attempt to deal actual damage, I've also recruited 3 Infernal Masters. These guys have an impressive torrent profile and the ability to automatically convert their wound rolls into 6s after the roll to wound, meaning that with Devastating Wounds active from the Cult of Magic Detachment ability, they will automatically be doing at least 1 devastating damage to the target. That also works in melee potentially too, and on your opponent's turn on saving throws, making Infernal Masters some of the best combat casters Thousand Sons have access to. My favorite thing about them is that their psychic power is throwing a screamer at you. We're not doing any janky flame blasts or firestorms. He just pulls his screamer out of his back pocket and Kobe's it. For their endless utility, I also brought a trio of Exalted Disc Sorcerers to bind up my opponent with sexy whips and chains. So in total, we have 6 disc-mounted wizards to zip around and do janky wizard shit. On top of that, between Ahriman, the Exalted Sorcerers, and the Infernal Masters, we have also 7 foot sorcerers to supercharge them with... Lastly, we need some friends from the Netherworld to do my very favorite thing, and that is score victory points. I've got an Umbralific Crystal on one of the Exalted Sorcerers to give it a little bit of an uppy-downy, but we can do better than that. And fortunately, Chaos Demons have a great grip of Tzeentchian Psyker characters that are available to take in Thousand Sons armies. And unlike most of the lame Thousand Sun Psychers, they actually deep strike naturally, so that makes them much better objective scorers, despite the fact that they don't actually contribute to the Kabbalistic ritual pool. To that end, I rocked the Blue Scribes and the Changeling to add lone operatives, so I had some resilient units that could actually survive standing on an objective for at least 1 single phase of the game before being ruthlessly murdered by my opponent's bolter-equipped tactical marines.
Oh, you little blue creep! Run, Clumsy, run! This time you won't get away!
Now, to be fair, it was only after my game that I realized the Blue Scribes are somehow not in fact Psychers, but given that their datasheet describes them as performing sorcery not once, but twice, I feel like we can probably give these 2 little cuties a pass. On top of that, the secret sauce from the Demon's Index are Flux Masters. For the same price, just about as a Zangor Shaman, you get the Demon equivalent with a similar profile. They've even got a disc to boot. But they're also an Infernal Master from Wish, with a slightly crappier version of the Infernal Master's ability and built-in Devastating Wounds, letting them auto-convert saves or their hit rolls into automatic wounds and automatic devastating damage once per round. So we've got 2 of them in the list as well. And with that, we're left with Magnus, 13,000 Sun Sorcerers, and 4 independent demonic contractors to act as local security in flagrant violation of the 2006 Military Conditions Act. And with that, I submitted it for a game. Now, this game was up against the new Robo Boys, Adeptus Mechanicus, and their new Stalker Cohort Detachment. That makes them highly resilient against long-range guns, which is fortunate for me since my wizards universally forgot their rifles at home. That said, my opponent had 2 huge bricks of Cataphron Breachers, which, while not really supported by the detachment, was largely about the Skitarii keyword, do support their army as a phenomenal anti-vehicle gun platform. Unfortunately for my opponent, I had forgotten all my vehicles at home, given the fact that vehicles are not, in fact, wizards. But unfortunately for me, what they are good at doing is killing literal hordes of arthritic old magicians in a single shooting activation, so we still have to pay them a lot of respect. The rest of my opponent's army was composed of Skitarii, bravely riding into battle in Scorpius Dune Riders. While the Skitarii themselves are easy enough for the wizards to hex into oblivion, the armored D-Day landing craft are not typically distracted by sleights of hand and pulling rabbits out of hats, so dealing with those first would be a little bit of a problem. And with that in mind, I set up as conservatively as possible, packing as many sorcerers as I could into their respective ruins and keeping most of my demons, besides the blue scribes, in reserve. Fortunately, some of these shamans had divined the future in the entrails of a hapless chicken before the game and seen good fortune, which manifested in my skillful roll to win the first turn.
That's for it. Hey, it's me. Oh no, just kidding, it's no one, because it's Tuesday and Steam crashed.
Now, my opponent had a hugely voluminous army, which meant that he couldn't actually hide it all in the first turn.
So I don't even know what there's any like counter deployment strategies, because it's just you got all this stuff with you want.
I get to see where shit is. So yeah.
So he elected to deploy on the line with a lot of his transports and other vehicles. This meant that on the first turn, when I drew Bring It Down, it wasn't entirely a waste, as I had a fairly dangerous unit of Sidonian Dragoons eyeing me from across the battlefield that I could bully into giving me their lunch victory points. With that in mind, I put my ludicrous 28 Cabal points to good use by bravely sacrificing a Shaman henchman to move block the Sidonian Dragoons so that they didn't charge into and kill basically all of my wizards in the ruin behind him. He was also able to score me engaged on all fronts and throw a cheeky and effective Doombolt into the Dragoon squad. That was followed up by Magnus showing his impressive sorceress might by extending his range, using Kabbalistic rituals to reroll all of his hits and wounds, and unleashing the devastating power of his sorcery, killing exactly one of them.
So 9 total on somebody? Or I guess, oh, you get a wounded guy. So it's 3 times 3 damage. This one takes 2. Takes 2. Jesus Christ, okay.
Hey, there's the strategy.
What the fuck? Alright.
Not an amazing start, but at least we started the game with some completed secondaries. My opponent followed that up by pushing forward very aggressively, running down my poor shaman with his taser lances and cleansing several objectives. He had taken fixed secondaries due to my predominance of characters because he was fairly confident that he could score assassination. I only had 18 characters in the list, so I wasn't sure if he was going to be able to max that one out. That's a joke, by the way. 18 characters is stupid. Now, fortunately, the fact that I did take so many characters meant that my army was very small, and Magnus was all shields up against incoming attacks, with damage reduction and the potential for rerolls on his saving throws. So the single breacher unit that my opponent had begun on the table didn't have much to do on his first turn, so he left it cowering on his home objective. The other breacher unit was in strategic reserve to cut an angle and tried to knock out some of my sorcerers in a future turn. Now, that said, cowardice only gets you so far against Magnus's illimitable mind trickery. And with a draw of capture enemy outpost on round 2, I knew I had to get up into the toaster's grill to really unleash the mind freak on him. And with that in mind, I did some wonky hand motions, recited some gibberish Latin-sounding words, and enacted maybe one of the most harebrained Rube Goldberg schemes in recent wizarding memory.
Let's get janky. Who wants to get hyper janky?
That started with my Umberlific Crystal Sorcerer taking to the skies and uppy-downeying to take advantage of a small gap in my opponent's deployment zone, left by an advancing Dune Rider that would allow him to draw line of sight to the Breacher team. Magnus then pushed extremely forward into the dead center of the table, using Temporal Surge to get himself close, but not quite on the enemy objective. One of my disc sorcerers had, before the battle, been granted the prestigious and frankly fairly pompous title of Lord of Forbidden Lore, which allows him to duplicate rituals that I had already performed. Normally, you can't perform a ritual more than once per phase, but he is not subject to that restriction. That allowed him, with his Psychic Might, to bodily pick Magnus up and yeet him across the table at a velocity approaching an appreciable percentage of the speed of light. That put my Demon Primarch's massive OC of 6 squarely on my opponent's home objective and stealing it away from him. But surrounded by ruin walls, he had no good line of sight to any solid targets, until the Umberlific Crystal Sorcerer, who was cowering in my opponent's own deployment zone, granted him the arcane ability to shoot massive laser beams directly through walls. And between those two and a cheeky Doombolt, we're able to one-shot the entirety of the Breacher squad. Now on the left flank, my tiny Cabal of Sorcerers pushed forward to deal with the looming threat of the Martian piggyback riders. My opponent felt very strongly, however, that the unit would survive, and backed up that unshakable belief with a string of frankly ludicrous saving rolls that left one Dragoon alive after the dust had cleared of multiple Infernal Masters, Exalted Sorcerers, and Ahriman both shooting and charging him.
The Infernal Master over there.
2 AP2. 5 up.
So just the 1 damage then. I'll shoot an Exalted Sorcerer here. 2 more AP2.
5 up. Jesus. These guys and their
Oh my
involves.
god, okay. That one. So 1 Devastating, 1 AP2 on these guys from the other Infernal Master.
AP2.
Oh my god.
Damage is 1?
Yeah. This is not great. That was distinctly unfortunate.
That Dragoon promptly turned around and gave Ahriman a swirly and shoved him into his locker for being a total nerd. We did, however, get the consolation prize on that flank of vaporizing a Dune Rider after Ahriman brutally twisted its organs until it agreed not to roll armor saving throws against my Infernal Masters, and they were able to blast it away. Now, it is a little known fact that the frail bodies of magical practitioners are not quite resilient enough to withstand 647 grains of high caliber machine gun ammunition, and my opponent wasted no time in presenting his own trick of magic. He was able to, in fact, perform alchemy by transforming the bodies of my sorcerers into an alloy of lead and abject sadness.
I'm glad you changed your last name, you son of a bitch.
With this showcase of alchemical might, my opponent was able to reduce Ahriman and the sorcerers that were supporting him to their component parts with a unending hail of heavy stubber shots, while the blue scribes and my Zangor shamans on the other side that were cowering in my deployment zone were generously granted several forms of malignant cancer by massed radium weapons of the remaining Skitarii vanguard.
And into that rat creature.
Excuse me, he's a goat. A goat bird, I think? I don't know what they are, honestly.
2 hits, 2 dev wounds.
He is the mounted guy.
Oh, okay. 4.
So it's just 1
then
wound.
just a normal save.
I guess that's the one time made mounted was a benefit. He had it.
Dropping my ritual score from an impressive and frankly majestic 28 to a extremely sad 14.
We could probably just have dialed in 20 assassinate to begin with.
That was enough to score a second big turn, however, as luckily I drew investigate signals on my 3rd battle round before my opponent had brought his own reserves in, and while my demon contractors were still waiting patiently for the phone call in reserve. That let me score another huge turn of secondary objectives, completing all 4 table quarters for investigate signals.
The minions of the Dark Gods, the true forms of chaos. What do you do in every single game? We do objectives. Every single time.
What is my purpose? You do objectives.
Oh my god.
Between the Changeling, Flux Masters, and the backline Exalted Sorcerer that had Umberlific Crystal the previous turn, they were able to perform the actions while Magnus did his best to rectify the attritional deficit in the center, beating a defenseless Honor Judoon Crawler to death with his big stick. With the big guns on my opponent's side now neutralized, I wasn't really worried for Magnus' safety anymore. Ironically, despite the fact that they are probably one of the most fearsome units in the Adeptus Mechanicus Codex and are extremely lethal against vehicles, the same is not true for monsters, which Magnus is one of. Because while he is a vehicle for destruction, he is not in fact vehicle keyworded. Maybe they forgot that on his datasheet like they did Psyker on the Blue Scribes. Now that said, I had a grand total of like 20 OC in this entire army, which meant that I had to try extremely hard to actually score primary objectives, since my opponent was flooding the table with mass numbers of Skitarii. So I knew I needed to clear out my opponent's ability to actually score primary objectives to have a hope of winning. This was made kind of difficult by the arrival of my opponent's reserves in the 3rd battle round, and his 2nd Breacher team made short work of no less than 3 separate sorcerers with a cheeky Splitfire. He had a Ranger unit in the corner, dragged down the Changeling, and beat the shrieking eldritch mass of Lovecraftian ether flesh into submission with the butts of their regular rifles. And to make matters worse, a henchman unit made a long unassisted charge out of strategic reserve to tie up one of my Flux Masters, ensuring that it wasn't really going to contribute much else to the rest of the game. Now at this point, I was inundated with an infestation of tiny toasters, and I responded in the same way that one typically does to a colony of ants, cockroaches, cockroaches or termites living in their home. With liberal application of unknowable powers granted by
occult outer gods at the low and affordable price of one's immortal soul.
Use fireball and only fireball. Nothing but fireball. Just fireball. Just fireball. Just fire.
Magnus began doombolting, laser beaming, exploding, and also beating to death with a stick as many Mechanicus as he could get his hands on. And despite my opponent rolling a staggering succession of good saving throws,
So that is 6 AP1 or AP2 and 2 devastating damage.
5 up.
come on, man.
What the?
This is so frustrating. He and my one remaining Infernal Master were able to slowly climb out of the hole, knocking down my opponent's primary by clearing out his remaining Skitarii Vanguard that were camping his objectives. While Assassination was a big score for my opponent over the course of the game, shockingly, somehow, he was able to get points on that secondary. The sheer number of units that I brought to the table forced most of his units to attack every turn, meaning that his ability to cleanse wasn't particularly significant, and he actually ended up dropping some points on secondaries from that. And due to the scenario pressure I was able to introduce, knocking my opponent's units off their objectives until a bottom round 5 score, I was able to squeak out a victory 73-67 by the end of the game. So in summary, Wizards are pretty good.